Hi, I'm Doug Major, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you regarding the cerebellar contributions to vision, clinically applying the neurologic research with advanced eye movement techniques here for the 2023 Kraskin Invitational Skeffington Symposium. We're going to go ahead and divide this into three parts. The cerebellum is the eye motor control and attention center. There's the areas of interest in the cerebellum, called the triads, and then applying the neuromechanisms for better clinical outcomes. If you're like me, I really was given minimal training on the cerebellum. Obviously, we have the ABCs, the accuracy, balance, and coordination that the cerebellum provides, and this unique homunculus that is in the cerebellum. But it seemed like as I learned and relearned the cranial nerves, there was all those big peduncles that were chopped off the backside of the brainstem. And that backside was really where so much of the eye movements happen. And also, of course, that you can have a complete absence of a cerebellar agenesis, and people still live with that without profound neurological dysfunction, or at least so they say. What really got me excited to re-explore the cerebellum was the work of Tara Alvarez, as she started to look at the neurobasis of some eye movements, particularly convergence and convergence insufficiency. She found that a key area was presented at the Academy as the oculomotor vermis. And truthfully, I didn't even know what that was, but I had to literally said out loud, wow, this huge, again, great research. And of interest, that's the area that seems to change the most with vision therapy as we work on developing those skills. The oculomotor vermis changes. And many of us have different technologies, beginning technologies like the right eye health, IQ health, and it accesses cerebellar function 90 or over 90% of the time. The cerebellum is involved with these eye movements as a sign of dysregulation, a lot of times emphasizing a hypermetric or a too large movement. But what really changed my view of the cerebellum is the work of this man, Dr. Jamsed Jahar. Jam has done a great job of assessing and connecting with the purpose of the cerebellum as regarding eye movements. And we just finished a wonderful paper. Jam has kindly worked with me to do a question and answer type of a paper that's in the brand new Vision Development and Rehab article and as a feature article last December. Would suggest you go and look at that to really appreciate the magnitude of his work, and particularly his work with the Brain Trauma Foundation, where he was able to establish guidelines for coma and now has continued on and beginning the process of establishing those same type of international guidelines for concussion. And of note to us, the inclusion of vision work and optometric work, optometric vision therapy, is a part of a key part of that rehabilitation team. One of the things that drove Jam to this conclusion was his work with what happens after a mild brain injury with concussion, and the idea that the cerebellar peduncles are involved and change with axonal shearing. And so he and Rick Ivory from Berkeley came up with this hypothesis of prediction, that the cerebellum is just that important area where prediction occurs. And because it answers this key question, the brain is present is the present's past. And so the brain has to predict. The brain has this hard problem. It's impossible to be in the present because of the time it takes for neuro processing. And so you predict the future to interact with the present and experience the past. As Jam and I talked, I was able to share it with him, the work of A.M. Skeffington, and he astutely pointed out there's the where is it system and the what is it system, but what about the when is it system? And we have to, again, reminding the cerebellum contains 70 billion neurons, 4 times that of the neocortex, and they seem particularly involved with that temporal organization. And even though the neocortex is of our brain, and the human, sapiens sapiens, is the crowning achievement of evolution, the cerebellum expanded up to 6 times more than anticipated through evolution of apes. And so the evolutionary comparison shows that expansion, and that expansion allows the cerebellum to predict and free up the neocortex from always being in the now. So that's why there's so many brain cells there. More brain cells either indicate better prediction, and 70% of all brain cells are the granule cells in the cerebellum. And during brain growth, during that critical time, the first year of life, the cerebellum increases in volume by that 88%, and then continues thereafter. And maybe as we think about myelinization, that's what I was taught. We develop through myelinization and pruning of those neurons, which is obviously part of it. But maybe we should be also thinking about granulization, how those few cells, that line of cells in the cerebellum, combine together to appreciate prediction as young people. And that's how, according to Jam, which is a great hypothesis, that's how we develop ourselves. Until we really understand where we fit in the temporal world, that predictable state versus our own sensory feedback, we can't really achieve that this is my movement. So that development of self, appears at the same time as prediction. And I would suggest, along with Jam, that there's a link there. Some other interesting research and information regarding the cerebellum that I thought was appropriate was that the idea that the cerebellum connects mostly with the dorsal stream areas, and it's very sensitive to biological motion, but there was no link between the cerebellum and the primary visual cortex. In other words, the cerebellum is part of the where is it system and the when is it system, but keep it from getting confused, it is not at all involved directly with the what is it system. The rest of this paper is going to be indebted heavily to the work of Shames and particularly David Z. David Z is really the guru of cerebellum, and he did a great summary paper that talked about the state of movement disorders at the time. This is just 2 years ago. And the summary said that the cerebellum works as this neuro hub for optimizing eye movements through its mutual connections with the brainstem and beyond. And that there was 3 areas of the cerebellum we need that are related to control of eye movements. Number 1 was the flocculus paraflocculus, it's the tonsil, the nodulus, uvula, and then the dorsal vermis and the posterior fastigious nucleus, or we call it the FOR. And even though there's not exact compartmentalization of these functions, these 3 main areas provide a framework for oculomotor performance. And so he did a good Venn diagram of how these different 3 areas overlap. And he said, first, precise localization of the cerebellum can be confounding. And the main reason is that to maintain accuracy, precise calibration of motor performance shows that a robust adaptive capability. And this concept, unless you see a patient within seconds of onset of neurological insult, any abnormalities will not only show the immediate damage, but also the attempt of the cerebellum to repair the problem. So you think about that. Seconds upon onset of neurological insult, the cerebellum begins to change and try to fix it. And so that take-home message is really the cerebellum has plasticity on steroids. Eye movements are easily to observe clinically and measured quantitatively, and the idea that new quantitative bedside visiography and high-resolution structural and imaging can enable better localization of the deficits, but will assist in developing better diagnostic algorithms and novel treatments. And of course, we're going to concentrate on the novel treatments today. including medication and rehabilitation programs. I'll have you go back and look in his wonderful paper that's available online. You just get an idea of the number of involvement of the neurology of these three main areas. And obviously, most of the time, this is used just for diagnosis. Today, I'm hoping we think about this, because if you have a neurological area that's unique, that indicates that there should be an area that we can use that information to develop better and novel treatment regimens for our patients. I really appreciate the work of these men who developed an app called Focus Builder, very accessible, cheap. Cedric and Jason. Jason spent a lot of time with me explaining, that the work that they're doing, and really remarkable. As functional neurologist, Jason's suffering from a brain tumor. I would ask the best for him. Best thoughts for you, Jason. I'm not a kid anymore, so it's harder for me to learn things. And so I've developed a sort of a way of helping us all learn this or relearn this. And it talks about using the triad. So the triads in use and this connection between our eyes and our eye muscles have to include the vestibular and the neck muscles also. So for the semicircular canals, we use the example of pitch. Yes, yes, yes. Y'all, no, 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 y'all know. And roll, ear to ear. The triad for the semicircular canals. A lot of times we forget the triad for the otoliths. Bob Pitch Pepper, if you don't remember, was a famous optometrist that used the trampoline as a way of correct stimulation before he did his vision therapy. So Bob, up and down, Bob. Weave, side to side, lunge, forward and back. And as you sort of get an idea, this is a big thing with boxing, going back and forth. But these, again, stimulate the otolith, the translational BORs. And then let's look again at the back of the brainstem. Again, still cut away, right? Cut away the cerebellum there. But really the triad of the superior colliculus, that mapping of the directional mapping of our visual world that's connected directly with the eye muscles. The inferior colliculus that gives that auditory and anti-gravity maths, again, linked closely to superior colliculus. And then there are all that close connections with the cerebellum for the attention inputs, the calculations, and the timelines for a predictive future. You see these massive amounts of neuroenergy you can just see just by cutting the cords there. And the last triad of interest is, I'm going to suggest, is sort of an embodiment of the descriptors of the cerebellum. And the early anatomists, when they look at the bottom of the cerebellum, I think they had this in mind. So let's think about this for a second. The vermis, I'm going to think of, let me show you my picture again. Think of putting my tongue at the top of my palate and feel that line. Think of that as the vermis. Uvula, that punching bag. I can sort of feel the back of my neck. And then even further back, I still have my tonsils that haven't been removed. Feel the tonsils. And these are the three areas of interest that we're going to talk about associated with eye movement with the cerebellum. So let's go again, the hard palate, the FOR and the OMV, the vermis, tonsils, the flocculus, paraflocculus, and then the uvula, again, just called the uvula and the nodulus. These areas of concern, and as you look in the bottom of the anatomist, that's why they chose those things. So hopefully that'll help us learn these things. Also got to express appreciation for many of the strives for not only JAM, but for Dr. Eric Cobb, and as a functional neurologist, his group called Z Health University. I've done their training, and I'm just so impressed with the level of experience that they have. And I thought it'd be helpful for us to actually get an idea of the level of sophistication he requires of his athletic trainers as they work with people, and this connection between eyes and vestibular and neck. So here's 4 questions of one of his, he's used and modified a little bit for one of his tests that you have to take to gain a level in his education system. So here we go. Question number 1. Your patient is complaining of muscular strain around his eyes while performing smooth pursuits diagonally down and left. So you decide to activate the associated extraocular muscles with the reflective eye movements instead of just voluntary ones. Which of the following therapy would best accomplish this goal? A AVOR drill, angular VOR drill for the patient's right posterior semicircular canal, angular VOR drill for the patient's right horizontal semicircular canal, a VOR cancellation drill for the patient's left posterior semicircular canal, a gaze fixation drill while the patient's eyes are diagonally down and left. Yeah. I know the three-step Park system for identifying eye muscles, but this is all brand new to me. And of course, here's your cheat sheet if you want to go back and look at this about the different areas of stimulation. And notice that the cerebellum is ipsilateral, right side cerebellum for right movements, left for left. Here's question number 2. A vestibular ocular reflex, a VOR from the right anterior semicircular canal would best excite which of the following extraocular muscles? And it goes down the different rectus and a few the obliques. Of course, it takes 2 muscles. Again, this should be intuitive to us as we think of the RALP and the LARC plane. These planes that drive, and we'll talk more about how they are so hardwired to our eye muscles. Number 3, which of the following directions of gaze fixation would be most stimulating for the right half of the cerebellum? Eyes diagonally down and left, eyes up, eyes diagonally up and left, eyes left. There's a little cheat sheet down here that might be helpful later. And one last one. After observing your patient walk with his left shoulder and left hip internally rotated, you decide to use some motor stimulation stacked with ocular motor input to provide corrective activation for this neurological gait pattern. Which of the following combinations would be most stimulating for the brain structure of interest? Just to give you a hint, think of Parkinsonian, again, ipsilateral, left shoulder, left hip internally rotated means left cerebellar involvement. And the idea of the cerebellum is best stimulated by complex nonlinear body movements. So let's go over some questions. The complex body movements on your left side while fixating on a target to your left. Complex body movements to your left side while fixating on a target with eyes right position. Complex body movements with right side while fixating a target with a target in left eye position, and a simple uniplanar body movement on your left side while fixating a target on your right position. And sophistication of this is fascinating. And of course, we do an infinity walk or infinity eye movements help stimulate this type of novel activity that the cerebellum thrives on. And so we could talk a little bit about ocular reflexes here. Eyes up facilitate extension up and out. Eyes down facilitates flexion down and in. Eyes right facilitates right rotation as well as right extension, left flexion. Eyes left facilitate left rotation, left extension, right flexion. Eyes are so integrally linked with our motor system. And where is it linked? Well, a lot of it's linked in the cerebellum. Isn't it amazing how the cranial muscles are stacked in such a unique way? First of all, of course, the ocular motor nucleus, which has the inferior rectus, the superior rectus, that's up higher in the system and really is designed for more flexors. And then right underneath that, the unique muscle that flips sides on us, the superior oblique, is actually the ultimate flexor as we look down and in, right? And then it has to be further down to the abducens, the extender eye muscle. As we look up and away, eyes move out, and that's closely associated with the cerebellum, which also is a flexor area. So flexor, extender, And these areas actually work together, but using this idea can help us stimulate the correct areas to drive neuro change as we work with our patients. And so let's get into our three areas, the cerebellar contributions to eye movements. And this just is important. This is where again, one of the other areas that maps are corrected, learned, and stored along with other areas of the brain. But this other concept, 75% of cortical surface area, as well as the number of neurons, huge amounts of brain power in our cerebellum that's got to be used for something. And so just some of these ideas. The cerebellum is a core function for the visual motor system to optimize oculomotor performance, to fine-tune all types of eye movements, helps coordinate them with the head and body positions. And the cerebellum is intimately involved with real-time, this idea of predictability, immediate modulation, just seconds, of gaze shifting, gaze stabilization, as well as long-term calibration and adaptation. And again, the cerebellum is just so accessible to test. So again, the Romberg's, gait with perturbation, somebody pushing you, finger to nose. Think of all the drunk tests, right? Tapping, rapping, and rebounds test. We should all have a good 2 or 3 cerebellar tests we can use to locate if there's functional areas, and not just for deficit, but also performance. In other words, we're also looking for ways of enhancing performance of people that are functioning reasonably well. This was shared with me with Deanne Fitzgerald, a great patient's, again, chief complaint list. And again, divided into 3 areas: the cerebellum, the spinocerebellum with the balance and balance on one side and sway. The cerebrocerebellum with clumsiness of hands and feet, hands shaking when reaching for something. And then the vestibulocerebellum, the dizziness of disorientation, back muscles that tire quickly when standing. Again, some excellent ways of identifying with patient symptoms of where we should put our efforts. And so here we are to the 3 main contributing areas. First, we'll call, again, think of the hard palate in the middle of your mouth, the FOR and OMV. And remember, these are most activated during acceleration and deceleration of smooth pursuits. And as an accelerator, it's also associated with driving saccades. And it learns speed adaptation and learning. Think back about your tonsils, tongue all the way back of your throat, the flocculus, paraflocculus. These are essential for holding eccentric gaze fixations. People forget how important that is. We'll go with that a little bit further. And a significant role for pursuit maintenance. Okay, so the FR starts them, but to maintain that area is the flocculus. And then it modifies the strength or gain of angular and rotational VORs. And so we think of that, again, that automatic system that's developed even before we're born. And that has to do with directional adaptation and learning. And the last one is the nodulus and uvula. And that's more responsible for the translational VORs. In other words, think of the otolith triangle, the bob and up and down, side to side. And this controls that velocity storage mechanism and slow angular VORs. So again, in other words, this would be VORs that are not driven by semicircular canals. And the unique thing, of course, of all this is it's directionally specific. And so the FOR region is discharged when it goes in the contraversive or downward direction. The flocculus is the horizontal, more the ipsilateral pursuits and fix in the ipsilateral side. Vertical pursuit muscles are sensitive to maintaining that diagonal and downward fixations. And there's actually an area of torsional activation off to the side. So let's investigate that a little further. Before I go further, though, I really got to appreciate the work of this individual, Dr. Jan Fitzgerald, the president of NORA last year. And during the process of this paper, she's actually come up with a very unique overview, an hour-long overview of the cerebellum and eye movements. So we've been talking about this. I'm glad she's put that together. It's just a few dollars at Brain. So if you want to go further, make sure you pay the $15 and listen to Deanne. Great applications. Again, this is just a taste today. Definitely we could go deeper and deeper and deeper. So let's go back. The retina is the only part of the brain that moved, and the eye needs to be treated as this coupled joint, as a moving platform with the neck and the body. It needs to be explored and mapped, stimulated by movement. And this unique concept that the VOR is developed in utero, and myelinated fibers at 24 weeks at gestation. And then, of course, the eyes actually opened at 28 weeks. So again, VOR, it's being done in the womb. Let's go talk about this tremendously powerful connection between the eyes and the semicircular canals. That, again, develops before birth. This concept, there's 18,000 vestibular fibers in each human, and they fire at least 1 million times per section collectively. And that's when the head is still. And so this is a balancing act between the right vestibular nuclei and the left. And so what happens? Well, if I go ahead and move my head, that immediately triggers that left horizontal canal when I look to the left, increase that 1 million fibers to drive the eyes in the opposite direction. Again, this is this VOR, and if it's done with exact accuracy, we call that a gain of 1, a VOR a gain of 1. And that's where, again, this whole mechanism of storage. And same thing with the other side. So again, I move my head to the right, that immediately increases the activity of that right canal and immediately drives those eyes to the left. And again, this is really seamless, right? We just go, yes, 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 and that's what a VOR, or excuse me, no, 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 and that's what a VOR does, of course. Let's think about our hard palate for a second. Again, even though the VOR is more traditionally associated with saccades, it plays a role in pursuits and fixation. Remember the pursuit activation. And it also refines the microscopic saccades needed to keep our photocells activated. And maybe just to simplify, the FOR speeds up the eye going in the opposite direction and slows down coming to it. And again, so when we do activities, any activity that we have to speed up and slow down, we can use a semicircular canal to drive this, or do it even slower to drive this system. And so again, here's a really cool way of doing it. You get an idea of the power of just different locations. Again, decelerating up and to the right or left, depending on the side, and then accelerating down. And you think about that, what's accelerating down? That's convergence. Again, that's so important. And remember, convergence, painful convergence after brain injury is really one of the signs that we look for. And improvement with specialized yoke prism and other things, as we adjust the map, changes all these things. And so these two systems that we think of our palates, the FOR and the vermis, upregulate saccades, and that has to do with these areas of the brain. As we look, of course, left, we've got the left pons. Excuse me. We look to the right, we have the right pons, right cerebellum, and the left frontal lobe. And then the power is when you look straight up and down. Again, the idea that we've got those cranial 3 muscles, so we're isolating that mesencephalon. Lots of very unique stimulations we can do by changing just location. If you have a right eye, they have something called a saccatometer that optometrists don't really use, but are used by functional neurologists, that really measures this exact gain problem in a very precise way. And so let's go ahead and think about the tonsils for a second. I'll put our tongue back on the tonsils, and the foremost function of the tonsils is to, on the ipsilateral, medial, and superior vestibular nucleus, and those Purkinje cells inhibit the neurons of these nucleus that excite the motor neurons associated with horizontal and the anterior canals on that side. Isn't it amazing? Again, it's just these different areas, and that's actually divided when it comes off the vestibular nerve. You can actually stimulate that with something called tone pacer. It's just fascinating, the different areas of connections we have. And then there's just huge amount of learning that occurs through the granule cells and the inhibitory effects of the Purkinje cells. So for simplification, for fixations and smooth pursuits, the flocculus and paraflocculus helps eyes move in the opposite direction of the ipsilateral, horizontal, and anterior canals of the VORs. And of course, fixation is so important. It's the foundation of all movements. It's what we have to do. Why do we have eye movements? Because we have to keep we have to fovealize everything to keep the things clear. So a tremendous amount of effort is spent on putting that attention. Just want to mention that Jack Richmond just had a wonderful, paper that really summarizes a lifetime of working and his eye movements, reading, and visual attention and automaticity, and how they're related. Again, the connections you'll see evident as we talk about visual attention, again, with the work of Jam. He's just done such a great job of locating that the main thing we're teaching really is visual attention. And where is that fixation attention occurring? Well, I would suggest that so much of it is occurring in the cerebellum. So let's look at the cerebellum for the flocculus or the tonsils. And again, in this upward direction, and then to the left and right, and then look at this. This is the torsional. If you look way to the left, and if you fixate to the left and look down, that's again establishing some issues with the torsional part of the system. Isn't it fascinating that most of this is going down? So as we look up, it's a whole different system. So the directionality of this is so fantastic. So how do we again get this going? Let's go ahead, and we're going to go in this time now. We're going to go ahead and move our eyes with a smooth pursuit to the right. And what happens immediately is the neck wants to move in that direction, but to hold that eccentric type of fixation, that requires the right flocculus to inhibit, to keep that from moving and holding to the right. And the same is true at the left. If I go ahead and move my eyes to the left by pursuit or saccade, again, it has to be inhibited, or that neck muscle will also. So again, these systems go in both directions. The eye moves, causes, again, interaction with the canals, or the canals move, cause interaction with the eyes. And so the upregulation of these smooth pursuits are activating the cerebellum and really cancels this, what I call the cervico-ocular reflex that happens from infancy, this tonic neck reflex to look towards things. And, you think about that, again, it gets over 10 degrees, and you literally have to hold your neck from not moving. You can actually feel the muscles want to move as we look to the right and to the left. And again, the same thing as we look at horizontal patterns, how that when we look to the right, that is actually stimulating the left cerebellum, and we look to the left, that's stimulating the contralateral of the right cerebellum for these pursuit movements. And then, of course, the up and down saccades, again, just both sides of the brain, well stimulated. Maintaining fixation is a unique thing. And again, we have an MIT, the little propellers that allows you to have that visual feedback, because a lot of times after a binocular problem, the eyes don't know where to aim. But as we teach that, we can use this also just to enhance other things, or just selective stimulation. A good way of doing that is this to the right, the troxler effect. Just looking really, if you look really hard, of course, at the the X, and we talk about stimulating for up to 30 seconds, and by that time all those dots will disappear as the retina gets washed out. But you can, if you move, of course, they'll reappear. So a great way of feedback of knowing where to hold your attention and move your fixation, or looking as you keep your nose straight here, you can go ahead and look at the cardinal directions of where to put your eyes. So let's look at that system going diagonally. So let's move our eyes down to the left, and what happens? Well, the rod flocculus has to inhibit the anti-gravity system, which also works on those the canals to hold it in position. And the same is true to the left, stimulating, maintaining that position. One of the most powerful ways of self-selecting this was done by Carrick, a functional neurologist, that he calls colliculus mapping activities. But it also could be obviously a cerebellar mapping activity too. As we go ahead and saccade up to your right and then pursue down to your left, that diagonal pattern isolates the mesencephalon. Just a very unique way of stimulating. This is the bubble activity on right eye, and it's also on some great activities on the Focus Builder app. Very powerful for correct stimulation. And let's not forget the uvula. That you got to move, jump, walk, weave, bob pepper. And that has to do again more with making sure we ensure movements. And I use this example. I had a gentleman, Calvin Baxter, who had double vision, and he would do 2 or 3 back flips forward flips into the pool with his head in a certain position, and all of his double vision would go away. It's just fascinating. Again, correct stimulation in the right place makes such a difference. And that's why Bob Pepper, increasing the saccular stimulation just before doing therapies was so successful for what he did. And he would do things that would actually increase binocular function as an immediate result, and then work from there as again, sensory stimulation. Correct sensory stimulation changes motor. Now, this is a great summary sheet that talks about all the different areas of the 3 areas, the FOR, again, the palate, the flocculus, the tonsil, and the uvula, the bunching bag. I'll let you look back over this and think of different ways of activating this into the therapies that you do. And again, going back to this almost immediate correction of learning and prediction that takes place in the vision. It's just fascinating how the granular cells, again, process and oscillate through the Purkinje cells, which tend to learn and long-term propitiation, as well as make sure it inhibits the correct state, and then it goes right back to the predictive state and the desired state. Just a fascinating feedback loop. And why is that important? Of course, the vestibular system is such a valuable portal to get us into the neurochemical state that flavors plasticity. Isn't that all we want to do? If you want to enhance somebody, we have to change their motor, change their everything, thought patterns, and that has to be in the state of neuroplasticity. And what a great place to activate that is the cerebellum. And again, adding eye movements to balance activities enhances disruption and neuroplasticity. And that vestibular system drives the neuroplasticity. It's hardwired to the cerebellum, and the neurochemical pathways are just a part of that error detection system that goes on. And due orientations of gravity or in posture with a little bit of instability supplies the needed novel input to drive change. Going back to the work of Jam, eye movement tasks require prediction. And again, this development of optometry using fixation vergent saccades, optokinetic, smooth pursuits, and then the vestibular people, ENTs and vestibular PTs using head movements, they really have to, I hope you realize by now, they are hardwired together. You cannot separate those two. So we both have to be involved with this. And measuring intention prediction is worked best through the variability of eye movements. And that's because the eye needs to keep that image right on the fovea. So prediction is needed to know what to look at next. And so you need to have something that you can predict, which is, again, a circular movement. And in so doing, JAM patented some great ways of measuring variance, and that's that mismatch, that jitter in the system, in a tangential, radical, and a phase way in a direction. And so during sleep deprivation, there's a certain type of radial variance, but concussion is mostly tangential and going back and forth, and particularly the phase difference goes ahead. And so here's a great example of that really shows this is a normal individual and how well they can follow. And then as soon as they we have a brain injured individual, and you can see how the individual jumps ahead. The brakes don't work anymore. Jumps ahead. And so this really supports JAM's hypothesis, and this is large numbers of people that have this. And then over time, treatment can become better. The cool thing about this is not just for the pursuits, which has to do with the variability and timing error, transitional error, but it also can be used for saccades, and that has to do with precision. Again, hypometric or how closely they're precise, as well as accuracy. And where's the accuracy? Is it on one side or the other? Again, a lot more precision, and we talk about the precision of that, but the precision of what we do, and then of course the precision with also the VOR cancellation, and now the new with the convergence. So we have precision and accuracy in all these areas available now with the new technology. So that leads us to end this talk, go back to David Z, who said that quantitative new bedside technology will assist in the development of better diagnostic algorithms and novel treatments, including rehabilitation programs that can take advantage of the central role of the cerebellum to monitor and adjust movements and keep them accurate. The point is the technology is already here. It's time for us to integrate these programs into our clinics and make them possible for our patients. And again, I just want to wish you the absolute best. Thank you so much for your attention, and let's help people become their neurologically best after injury or just for their own personal development. Thank you so much. And best wishes to you all.